Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to a wonderful Wednesday webinar with a climate emergency in a network, an ever-growing network. I think it's now, what have we got to? 36 climate emergency centres using vacant spaces around the UK for community-led organising and solutions and climate action. And we had a very good convergence just recently when about 18 of the 36 odd centres came and reported back. And it's incredible to hear the work that's going on in all these different community centres and environment spaces. So tonight we have a great honour of once again hearing from a prolific campaigner, Jon Fuller, who works with Media Revolution and a number of other organisations. But he's going to give us an update on the judicial review of the BBC output on climate breakdown, particularly with reference to the call for a national emergency briefing. There's been over 1,600 viewings being organised across the UK. So John's going to give us an update on that and reclaiming the BBC for the people. Over to you,
Brilliant.
John. Thanks so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much, Phoenix, for having me on again. It's very kind of you. So I guess my first complaint about the BBC's output was probably about 35 years ago when Top Gear was really at its worst, when it was vigorously promoting high speeds, cars driving as fast as they possibly can. Top Gear actually campaigned against efforts to control speed in towns. Against any kind of police enforcement or speed bumps or speed control measures. And at that time in the early 1990s, the UK had the worst child pedestrian fatality rate in the whole of the European Union. And I firmly believe that the messages that are put out by the media, primarily the big broadcasters like the BBC, but also the printed media, it has a big impact on the public at large. So you're not hearing any voice that says, "Look, we need to tackle speed around town. We're killing too many children, or it's immoral to kill children." Um, if those voices are completely excluded, it just doesn't enter part of public discourse. Whereas if people constantly get a message from BBC's Top Gear, something like that, that policing attempts to try and prosecute speeding motorists are just about raising money and it's a war on the motorist, all that kind of thing. Well, then we have very negative social attitudes in circulation around the UK. So I did quite a bit of work on the BBC, about 35 years ago, trying to get it to change its attitude towards speed. But then I started doing more work on climate change around about 2004, about 22 years ago. And it became apparent that climate change was real. I think we knew that. Most people knew that in the 1980s, but it was becoming apparent that it was really going to be dangerous and a lot of people were going to be killed. And it was apparent that the BBC was suppressing the most alarming news. So my first complaint to the BBC about its climate change output was in 2004. Since then, I got
Wow.
involved in Extinction Rebellion, and the first time in my life I've ever been arrested was attached to that pink boat that was parked, Extinction Rebellion parked in Oxford Circus, within sight of BBC Broadcasting House. So, I went through my life thinking I'm never going to be arrested. I'm a law-abiding citizen and all the rest of it. And, I've got strong political opinions, but I went through life thinking that, we obey the law and we try to get politicians to change their policies through democratic processes. But climate change was something that was completely different. Climate breakdown is something that's completely different. This has the potential to kill billions of people. In fact, I'm going to say to you, it's very likely that over a billion people are going to be killed. Very likely that over a billion people are going to be killed. This is an unprecedented emergency, an unprecedented catastrophe, unprecedented failure of democracy. Our species has never encountered any kind of threat like this. It's unique. So we do need to step up in different ways. If you possibly can, take non-violent direct action, civil disobedience, and I felt it was the right thing to do. And I was arrested twice with Extinction Rebellion. Obviously, nowadays it's much, much more difficult. If you organise something now where you're sitting down in the middle of Oxford Circus for a few days, then you get 10 years. You could potentially get 10 years in prison for it, just for even having a Zoom call to discuss it. So the state has moved very aggressively to stop that kind of thing. But climate change is still just going in one direction. It's still getting worse and worse and worse. And the recent heat waves in the UK and across Europe beginning to focus minds again. Whenever there's a climate calamity like this, more people get frightened, more people think this is really, really deadly. But at the same time, we have a massive pushback by mainly hard right politicians, Reform UK, and now the Conservatives pushing back, trying to stop action on climate. So, what is the BBC's role here? Back in 2004, there was a major report on infant mortality. More children, infants under the age of 1 year, were being killed by global heating. And it was the World Health Organization report. And the World Health Organization was saying that we're killing thousands of infants under the age of 1 year by the increased spread of disease. And I thought, killing hundreds of thousands of infants around the world, isn't that a news story? And I pushed the BBC, but they just wouldn't do anything, wouldn't report. And on and off over the years, I continued to press the BBC on this. And then other impacts of climate change. We had the Extinction Rebellion. We did all kinds of things to try and get the BBC to change. I was a member of a delegation from Extinction Rebellion to go and see senior executives at the BBC. So I went to Broadcasting House and met senior executives there.
I
And
remember that, John. How did that go? That was quite a significant meeting.
it was.
Much come from it, did you feel?
No, not much came out of it.
Mm.
They sat there, they listened to us. We put our points to them about the BBC's role in not just suppressing news that should be broadcast, but also giving social license to high polluting lifestyles.
Mm.
And there were a number of other points that came up in the meeting, and they pushed back quite hard against what we from Extinction Rebellion were saying. So, we had the meeting, but I honestly would say that nothing positive came out of it. BBC digs its heels in. It's determined to continue in the direction it's going in. So on and off over the years, I tried other complaints, and I tried different ways of trying to worm the complaints to try and get them to tell the public the most alarming facts on climate breakdown. And I even went through to Ofcom a couple of times, taking cases to Ofcom. Now, Ofcom said, because the basic argument I put forward is that the BBC suppresses the most alarming news. It regularly talks about climate change. It regularly mentions climate change is happening in BBC TV, Radio 4 programmes when we're talking about the heat waves. It doesn't so often mention that it's because of burning oil, gas and coal, but that comes out occasionally. But they're not. Well, they are talking about climate change and say, these heat waves are because of climate change and people will be killed because of this. So they will say, we're doing everything we should do. So I want to be very specific and clear about what I'm talking about when the BBC suppresses the most alarming news. One example would be the Parasol Loft report that was published beginning of this year. It's on the Institute of Faculty of Actuaries website. Professor David King and his team were involved in making that report. And that proves beyond all doubt that global heating is accelerating. And that has huge implications for life on Earth and for government policy and for all of us. So, the climate impacts that we might have expected in the 2040s are beginning to appear now.
Mm.
The climate impacts that we might expect to see in the 2060s and 2070s, we might see in the 2040s. It looks impossible that we're going to keep temperatures under 2 degrees Celsius of global heating. And so the BBC won't talk about what that means. They won't tell people that heating's accelerated and this is incredibly dangerous. And they won't say, look, we need emergency action to decarbonise. We've got to get on with it and do it. Now, there's research done by professors at the universities of Graz and Western Ontario, Professors Parncott and Pearce, and they got together, I think, 180 papers on fatalities associated with climate change. So how much heating causes how many deaths, what the impacts will be on agriculture, access to food, access to water. And their research showed that at 2 degrees Celsius of global heating, around 1 billion people will be killed. And that will play out over the decades that follow, us being 2 degrees Celsius at the point of 2 degrees Celsius of heating. Now, that is incredibly important news. That's 1 billion people to be killed. And the BBC don't want to report that. The Institute of Faculty of Actuaries, they have key part of their job is to look at risk. And they have warned in a report published last year that there was a plausible risk that 4 billion people could be killed if we reach 3 degrees Celsius of global heating. Now, this point about heating, a lot of modelling will say, well, look, on the basis of what we know about climate feedbacks like albedo and methane and in the atmosphere, what we know about them, we can only do our models on the basis of what we know, and we don't do the models on the things we don't know. But the point is that those climate feedbacks are beginning to hit, and hit very powerfully. Albedo is one of the most powerful ones, or is probably the most powerful one. So what's happening there is that in the Arctic Ocean, previously, before global heating reached like 0.5 degrees Celsius, the Arctic Ocean in the summer had a huge amount of sea ice over it. So when the sun, in the summer, the sun doesn't set for 3 or 4 months in the Arctic Ocean, and the sun's energy, huge amount of energy, hits the ice. It's reflected back out into space. About 90% of the energy is reflected back into space. But as that retreats, and it's retreating ever more rapidly, that 90% inverts. It's 90% of the sun's energy will hit the open ocean, which appears black from space. 90% of the sun's energy is absorbed. Only 10% is reflected back out. So that is a huge change, and that will accelerate heating even further. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the United States, their main weather climate body, says that the most likely year that the Arctic Ocean will be virtually free of ice. There's a specific definition for that, but they say the most likely year for that is the year 2034.
Wow.
And then heating really does, accelerate very quickly, much faster. So, there are scientists who look at that and they say, there's no way we're going to keep temperatures below 2 degrees Celsius. And we're definitely going to reach 2 degrees Celsius before the year 2050. So the BBC won't report that. It won't report Professor James Hansen's paper with his colleagues. And that says that this energy imbalance. What? Why? I'll come back to it in a minute. I'll come back to that in a minute. The BBC won't report on Professor James Hansen's paper that says that we're heading for 8 degrees Celsius of global heating. And that'll play out over the next 2 or 3 centuries. It won't happen immediately. It won't happen this century. But he says that his argument is we have to find a way to both stop emitting carbon dioxide, but also a way to artificially cool the planet. Otherwise, we're toast. We're done. We're done for, because very little will survive 8 degrees Celsius global heating. BBC doesn't report that. So we face billions of deaths. We face potentially extinction. And the scientific evidence is robust, but the BBC won't convey that to audiences. I could give you more examples of that kind of news, that kind of information, but maybe now's a good time to mention the why won't BBC report it. So the BBC, if people want to, I don't know if you've got a computer on there that allows you, or a mobile phone that allows you to quickly look on the BBC website. But the BBC website has on it, I just want to read it out to you. You can go to BBC Guidance on its website, look up accuracy, and then look up guidelines and risk. And you do put it in the search engine. This will come up quite quickly. And that is it's guidance on what content makers should provide and say to audiences. Let me just quickly call it up, because I had it in front of me just a moment ago and it's come off my screen, which is all very annoying. Bear with me, sorry, and I'll read it to you. So I'm actually going to do what some of you can do. BBC Guidance.
Yeah, it really helps this, backing it up with the facts and figures from the major organisations. James Hansen's been at it for decades and decades.
Yeah.
Massive. Mm. And the SQ batteries is pretty heavyweight as well, actually.
Okay, so I'm going to read this section out. So it's on the BBC website. I think I looked at this a few years ago, and there was nothing there. So I think the BBC has added this to the website probably about a year or 2 years ago. So this is, I think, is new material. I mean, but it's been in existence, I'm sure, for a long time. But now it's there. I don't remember the BBC publicising though this with the press release. So item 3.4.9, please bear with me because I'm going to read it. The reporting of risk can have an impact on the public's perception of that risk. For instance, with health or crime stories, or stories about the economy, weather, or climate. Content makers should avoid worrying audiences unduly and contextualise reports to be clear about the scale of the risk. This is particularly true in reporting health stories that may cause individuals to alter their behaviour in ways that could be harmful. The emotional impact of pictures and personal testimony should be considered, particularly on perceptions of risk. So the key words there I pick out is content makers should avoid worrying audiences unduly. Now, I think what's happening is the BBC doesn't want to worry audiences, but isn't aware that, in fact, this alarming news that I've referred to is robust. That this is peer-reviewed research. This is from extremely senior, well-respected scientists. This isn't fringe material. The NOAA and the Arctic Free Ocean in the summer. NOAA is one of the biggest weather monitoring organisations in the world, or perhaps it is the biggest. So the BBC, if it's interpreting its own guidance to say, if it's alarming news about climate, then we don't report it. And I would argue that they need to actually think carefully about unduly worrying people, because climate change is worrying. And it's the right emotional response. You should be frightened, you should be upset, you should be worried, you should feel alarmed. And that is because if you realise the gravity of the threat, you're more likely to say to politicians, I want something done about this.
Exactly.
And you're going to say to politicians like Reform UK, maybe the Conservative Party, I'm not going to vote for you if you're pursuing policies that could get me killed or my children killed. I'm not going to vote for you. So quite quickly, the public can have an impact upon political discourse, on the policies of political parties. But they need information, reliable information to be able to do that. And the BBC right now, where it is right now, it will just say regularly, this heat wave that's happened is unprecedented. It's really, smashed existing temperature records, and it's due to climate change. But only very occasionally does it say due to burning oil, coal, and gas. You don't get a politician on BBC being really pushed hard by a BBC presenter. Government minister, look, perhaps 1,000 people could be killed by this heat wave. What are you doing to accelerate efforts to decarbonise? What you do get on the BBC are a series of questions to politicians that, if you like, downplay the significance of climate change. The BBC will always argue and put tough questions to a government minister, whether it was the previous Conservative administration or now Labour, saying, yeah, but people don't want that solar farm there because of the visual intrusion. It really is going to disrupt their lives. People are really unhappy about it. So the BBC will speak up for people opposed to renewable projects. It could speak up for people like in Aberdeen recently, the by-election there, where people were saying, well, we're losing our jobs. This city is going to be in rapid decline. The BBC will speak up for people then, putting tough questions to politicians, really tough questions to politicians, saying, well, look, if you're going to let the oil and gas industry go into rapid decline, they're all going to lose their jobs. But when Nigel Farage is being interviewed on BBC TV, he's never asked, look, your policies are going to contribute towards mass death and mass suffering. Your policies could cause AMOC collapse, the Atlantic Meridian overturning circulation. Come back to that in a minute. But it's an ocean current without which we won't be barely growing any food at all in the UK. We'll cease to be a functioning society. We won't be viable as a nation. They won't put tough questions to Nigel Farage about that. They won't put tough questions to Kemi Badenoch about 1 billion people potentially being killed by climate change, about mass displacement of billions of people, unprecedented numbers of climate refugees. She won't get tough questions on that. And I mean, not ever. The BBC on TV have had a string of interviews this year over the controversy to do with Reform UK and Conservatives being opposed to net zero. And they will not put a tough question to a politician who wants to end efforts to decarbonise. And so we got a good team of people working with me who do a lot of media monitoring, a lot of monitoring of the BBC's output. And not once has BBC TV put a really tough question to a politician like Farage or Badenoch. But the tough questions still keep flying at those people, whether they be Green, Lib Dem or Labour, who do want to continue to decarbonise. So that's another string to the BBC's bias. So there's a bias associated with the alarming news. You know, the BBC won't post questions around the alarming news because they don't want to alarm the public, but there is a bias caused by that. That bias, therefore, benefits Reform UK Conservatives, and it acts as a disadvantage to the political parties that want to take action on climate. A point I put to the BBC is it's also a bias in favour of older people who may feel that there's no problem with continuing with carbon-intensive lifestyles, and a bias against young people, because the younger you are, the more you suffer from climate breakdown. You are disadvantaged by the BBC's coverage. So there's several aspects to BBC's reporting. One thing I perhaps forgot to mention just a moment ago was that business about AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation. It brings warm water from the equator up to Northern Europe. And what scientists have shown is that that's weakened by about 15%. And that weakening appears to be accelerating. And it's caused by so much fresh water flying off of Greenland as ice of Greenland melts. So much ice is melting that it's disrupting that ocean current. It's to do with the salinity, the saltiness of the water. And it's disrupting the ocean current. And if it stops, and it has done in geological history, then we will not get that warmth. So we'll have much, much colder winters, but still have much hotter summers. We will also lose a lot of moisture that's brought to us by evaporation from the Gulf Stream. So we will suffer extreme droughts, extreme cold in winters, and we will lose arable farming. The National Preparedness Commission advises government on security risks, and it says the risk of AMOC collapse has been underestimated, and that if it does collapse, it will virtually end arable farming in the UK. You won't be able to keep livestock outside, and you've lost your arable farming. So, you know, if we lose 90% of our food supply at a time when it's very unlikely we can import food from abroad, we're stuffed. I'd argue that that is such a crucial piece of news, the BBC should dedicate several documentaries to it so that the public are regularly informed of the science on it. So,
did Channel 4 just recently actually start to do something, a survey ship on the AMOC?
yes,
I know it's not the
yeah,
BBC, but
yeah,
there was some movement there. There's a glimmer of
yes,
light.
yeah. So the Channel 4 has reported on AMOC collapse. Didn't quite get some of the details right. They're a bit too technical to perhaps discuss on this call right now. But Channel 4 did bring it up. And I think it's really important to understand that there are some scientists who say that the ocean current could, a lot of scientists think that it will collapse gradually, that it will weaken and weaken and weaken. And it weakens to, you know, to extent of 50%. We will really feel the adverse impacts here in the UK. And total collapse is total devastation for us. But there are some scientists who say, no, it could actually collapse within a couple of decades. One of those scientists is Professor James Hansen. So not, you know, people that have no idea what climate change is about, just, you know, fringe alarmists. These are professional, reputable scientists who understand a lot about the physics, chemistry, and science. So
they're not 100% sure. I did have a lady who was a scientist in that ocean department come to the community I live at, and I said, everyone's discussing this AMOC in the movements at the moment. And she said, one of the things back from the chief scientist, obviously they're erring on the side of caution, was that they didn't have enough decades of data to see the long thing.
yeah,
So they're
yeah.
being cautious on making a call. But, you know, it is a very serious situation we need to be aware of and start to, you know, take urgent action on the solutions.
Yeah, there was a conference in Iceland recently, and the UK's chief scientific advisor was there. I can't think of the lady's name now, but she said that AMOC collapse is a national security threat.
For sure.
So, you know, we have to take this seriously. The BBC has mentioned online about the Joint Intelligence Chief's reports that was published. That was by the, was made available in central government, but the Labour government didn't want to publish it because they didn't want to alarm the public. That's the heads of MI5, MI6, Ministry of Defence, GCHQ, etc. So they say that climate change is just a massive, unprecedented national security threat that could destabilise entire countries and destroy our food supply and water supply. So the threats are enormous, but not being conveyed to the public by the BBC. Anyway, let me jump. I'm going to be conscious of time. So let me just jump forward now. When that national emergency briefing launched last year, what struck me was that 48,000 people, 48,000 people signed an open letter to the broadcasters and to the to the government, asking for a version of that to be broadcast to the nation. They felt that the government should address the people, and there should be a version of that briefing made available to the public, so everybody then knew. The fact that 48,000 people signed that made me think, we've got to go for judicial review. Because up till then, I was always thinking judicial review is probably the only way we're going to get the BBC to change. They will not change voluntarily. I suspect that their primary reason is not just the guidance they've got, but within the corporation, I suspect there are people probably more to the right wing of politics, more concerned about protecting their lifestyles than protecting future generations. So I think that there's probably a bit of political bias within the BBC, but they will not change. They really dig their heels in. They're not going to change unless forced to. Judicial review is the only way to do that, because Ofcom keeps saying we're a post-broadcast regulator. We can't regulate on anything the BBC hasn't broadcast. We can only regulate on what they have broadcast. Anyway.
So there was that 3-point strategy, wasn't there? Complaint to Ofcom and judicial review and taking things further. Yeah, any updates on where they are?
Well, so, I approached Leigh solicitors. They were very keen. They said, yes, this is really interesting. I gave them the legal basis of it. The BBC isn't conforming to its own charter. It's not conforming to the Communications Act 2003. And there's an obscure human rights precedent set in Strasbourg Court, which the UK is committed to, about the right to know being part of the right to life. If something risks your life, you have a right to know about it. So Leigh solicitors then put me in touch and had a Zoom call with Leigh solicitors and a KC, a barrister, David Wolf. He specialises in media. He's very keen to pursue it, but he said there's a problem. We've got one legal problem, which we've got to overcome. Excuse me. And that is, back in November last year, the BBC told a Telegraph journalist that it was planning to do a review of its output related to climate change. Now, the Telegraph would like it if the BBC stopped reporting on climate change altogether. Telegraph is a hard right-wing newspaper, very pro-fossil fuels. They don't want their lifestyles to be changed. Not of their owners, not their people who own the Telegraph, either before the current owners or current owners. So, but the BBC hasn't even started it. They said that they're going to do it, but they still haven't even commissioned it. And so Leigh have been pressing them continuously, saying, when are you going to start this review? And there comes a point at which Leigh will say, you've not started it. It looks like you've no intention of doing it. So we'll go for judicial review. But the problem that Casey, the barrister, pointed out was that if we go for judicial review right now, a judge is very likely to say, well, look, the BBC says it's going to do this review, and you should have exhausted all your remedies before you come to court. And if that review has the potential to sort out your problem, then you should have waited for that. So we're very frustrated because we're just held and pausing. There will come a point that I will say to Leigh, we've reached 9 months and the BBC still hasn't started that report, if the review, if that's the case. And I will say, look, the main issue here is not that review. The main issue here is that we're talking about mass loss of life. This issue is an unprecedented threat to the lives of people in the UK. If people don't understand that global heating is going to accelerate, they will not adapt, and businesses won't adapt to what's coming at them. The UK, its infrastructure won't be updated at the relevant speed that's necessary, and all kinds of things will start to collapse and fall apart in the 2030s and 2040s. So it's essential that the BBC and all broadcasters make sure the public know the severity of the threat. So that point is coming, but I'm not there yet. So I'm very, very frustrated I can't go to judicial review. 48,000 people signed that open letter. So I am sure, I have no doubt at all, that when we go for a crowdfunder appeal, we'll get that money to pay for the judicial review. We expect it to be about 50 £55,000. We've a group of friends have already paid for initial legal advice, which cost us 6,000. Initial work by Leigh. So yeah, I don't think there's any doubt at all that the public will chip in and say, yeah, and this is such an important issue, I will support judicial review. Don't think
Definitely.
any doubt at all about that. So at the moment, we're doing other things. I'm writing to loads of scientists saying to them, look, we're planning to do this judicial review, and it'd be very helpful if you could chip in with your comments and ask the BBC to get on with the review, make sure that the views of scientists are incorporated in that review, make sure the BBC tackles the issues like the really alarming stuff. And then I think it's coincidence. I don't think it's because of the emails I was sending around to loads of people, but a few days ago, on the 23rd of June, a group of scientists wrote a letter to several senior BBC executives, Channel 4, Channel 5 executives, ITV executives, and Ofcom, and said that the media is not alerting the public to the scale of the threats and calling on them to get on with it, tell people, make it clear to people that these heat waves are due to burning oil, coal, and gas, and that the threats are extreme. And you must tell people. So it's really helpful that we just had this letter issued by scientists, and I'm hoping that more scientists will follow up and chase the BBC. Another strand of work is that a group of friends are pursuing complaints with the BBC and taking them onto Ofcom, and that we're quite clever. We're trying to be clever, but I don't know if we are or we're not. But we're trying to be clever. Ofcom, I mentioned a few minutes ago, say that they are a post-broadcast regulator. So they can't rule on these really terrifying facts and items of news because, if the BBC hasn't reported it, there's nothing they can do about it. So what we've done is we've referred to interviews that appeared on BBC TV News and Current Affairs, where, like Nigel Farage is saying he wants to get rid of net stupid zero. And the BBC presenters don't ask any questions. So we're saying that is a bias. And what the BBC should have done is, for instance, say to Nigel Farage that your policies could cause the collapse of the AMOC ocean current and could ultimately decimate the UK population. How can you justify that? And we're giving BBC a number of examples of kinds of questions that they should have asked. So what we're doing is now we're taking that to Ofcom and saying, here is a biased report, where the BBC presenters are not posing tough questions to speakers like Nigel Farage, but do put tough questions to politicians who are trying to decarbonise. So it's biased, and we're weaving into the complaint this idea of the really alarming news that should be brought up. And we're just saying that, well, look, this is an instance when the alarming news should have been mentioned, and it wasn't. And therefore, there is a bias in that specific report. And there are lots of them. So that's all beginning to land on the desk of Ofcom now. And we'll wait to see how they react to that. But I think we need more pressure on Ofcom.
Yeah.
Felix and I, when we last had
How can we do that, John? How can we aim up
when we last discussed it,
pressure?
I think, we discussed something, and a lot of people on the call then said, we need a mass complaint. So I went to Extinction Rebellion and I said, look, you've got a digital rebellion group. Could you issue a template for people to go for a mass complaint? It didn't happen. They did, however, report. It was a really good report on the work that we're doing, the work that we're involved in. So I was really pleased that the work was reported to several thousand members of the Digital Rebellion group. But that online complaint process didn't happen. So it's only a relatively small number of people who are pursuing this complaint. And the first ones are beginning to go through to Ofcom now. They're just finishing the BBC process and on to Ofcom. And you've got to be pretty determined to follow it through. It's 3 steps to the BBC. First complaint, second complaint, and then head office have to review the complaint. And then you can go to Ofcom. And it's not an easy process. It's quite fiddly and quite restricted on the number of characters you can write into the online form.
Is there a way we could streamline this so that it's clearly set out for people and get as many Digital Rebellion would be good to go back to, but as many groups as possible, from World Wildlife Fund to RSPB to Greenpeace, to build that alliance of many groups all aiming it in at the same time, like the big one that XR organised of all these organisations.
So
You've got
what
to
I'm going
target
to
as many as we can.
propose Yeah,
Hmm.
what I'm going to propose now, Felix, is that once we give it a month or so for Ofcom to have received a few of these complaints, and there is a button you can click on the Ofcom website where you're going to go direct to them. And there are only exceptional circumstances when you're allowed to go direct to Ofcom. And so what we
Right.
want people to do is go direct, use the online form, and go direct to Ofcom and say, this is an unprecedented national security threat. This risks the lives of the youngest members of my family. I genuinely believe the youngest members of my family could be killed by this, and Ofcom must intervene. The Communications Act 2003 makes it clear that where there is a threat to life, particularly to young people, you must intervene. And try just giving people one step, and they go straight to Ofcom. They do an online form, and then we'll just have hopefully then we could have. It'd be great if we had hundreds of people complaining to Ofcom, and that would be really helpful in our judicial review when we come to that. Because if Ofcom refuse to intervene, solicitors, Leigh solicitors, are minded. They've not done the study on this, the law in detail on the Ofcom part of it, but it would appear that Ofcom are not adhering to the legislation. This notion they're a post-broadcast regulator doesn't stack up.
Mm.
So, Felix, what I'm going to propose is that very soon, like perhaps in about a month's time, we are going to organise a mass complaint direct to Ofcom. And it'll be on the basis of threat to life to a member of my family by the BBC.
Great. Let's all get behind this, folks, and not just us, but all of the organisations we link to and represent, following
Yes.
Jon's
I
focus.
mean, Felix, I tried, I'm known in the radical climate movement. People, quite a few people know me, several hundred people know me. Maybe if I'm lucky, maybe 1,000 people know me.
You're
But
very popular. You've been mentioned in dispatches.
I haven't got the reach to get, from just myself, I haven't got the reach to, get to hundreds of people to do a complaint to Ofcom. But if we got groups like RSPB, as you say, uh, Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace, if we got, Extinction Rebellion, everybody all saying, come on, we want you all to do this complaint direct to Ofcom. I reckon we could get to tens of thousands. I think we honestly think we could get tens of thousands of complaints. So
And also, we're using the National Emergency Briefing Infrastructure
yeah,
Network. There's like 400 people on the chat. There's supposed to be 1,600 cinema viewings coming up. If there was
yeah,
something in the next steps to action, was here's a simplified version of complaint to Ofcom
yeah,
as one of the NEB steps, that would really help. But
yeah.
okay, keep going,
So
John. It's
our big
great. And then
ask,
we'll have some questions as it flows. Happy to flow on. Are you okay to
yeah,
go to 10 past if you need to?
yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, cool,
So
cool.
what I'd say is, yeah, sorry, I've gone on a little
No,
bit
it's
longer than I wanted
it's
to, but
brilliant. It's on point. It's all relevant. People have put
yeah, I
hands
mean,
up as they
but
need.
your point, your question, Phoenix, is the key one. We need another step that everybody can get involved in. And it helps to remind people this is going on because when the time comes for a judicial review, we need to raise 55,000 pounds. As I say, I mean, hardly any effort at all. I got 6,000 pounds together, just we go around talking to some friends on that. So we can do it. So the big asks of the BBC, the big picture is they must report on the really alarming stuff. It's essential that business prepares, government prepares, and people in their own homes, in their own lives, they prepare. Even kids going to secondary school, they should know some stuff about this because it may impact the studies that they do at secondary school, the subjects they choose to take. Uh, so everybody needs to know. The big ask of the BBC is they must now set up a weekly prime time television program on climate breakdown, and it must be around specifically tackling the really alarming facts, the really alarming news. Make sure the public is extremely well informed. Uh, and also, there needs to be an element of advocating for the young, because right now nobody on BBC advocates for the young. There's no figure on BBC that has said, right, your job is to, really speak up, really powerfully on Question Time, whatever the programme may be. Occasionally being invited onto BBC Breakfast or into Newsnight. Your job is to really advocate, really push hard to protect the young. The BBC won't allow that. They'll have loads of people advocate on loads of different issues. Anything you could talk about. Taxpayers Alliance. Anything. You get individuals welcomed onto the BBC who will lobby for a particular cause. But the BBC never allow somebody specifically come in and really fight to protect the young and keep young people alive.
Mm.
So there's that element. And BBC News and Current Affairs, my big ask of the BBC is that climate change and the ecological emergency, they should always feature prominently in news programmes, and never should sport and entertainment take up more time than news on climate and ecological collapse. Climate and ecological collapse should always have a greater priority than sport and entertainment. And then it's a case also of current affairs, things like BBC Question Time, Newsnight must regularly have people on those programs who can talk with a solid scientific background. Scientists should have a more prominent role. We do need professional, reputable scientists to be on BBC Question Time from time to time and other programs talking about risk. And it isn't really, really important to say this. There is a very real danger that we will crash through 2 degrees Celsius well before 2050. It's a very real danger. And there's a very real risk that could kill billions of people. There's very real risk that degree of temperature increase could take us beyond the tipping point, after which AMOC will collapse. People, the public, need to understand risk. That's not certainty. They need to be told the difference between certainty and risk. But if there's a high probability, a high risk of something, the public must be told.
Yeah.
So, right, I have gone on far too long. It was a really important discussion we had there, Phoenix, about next steps and that complaint to Ofcom. We've got to let everybody else chip in, have more
Yeah,
conversations with people.
absolute diamond, John. Your diamond tip drill, and we need to get behind and fully support. And let's work out how we can actually simplify these Ofcom complaints and get a mass alliance of groups. Because to send this complaint in and get behind the judicial review and raise funds for it, because that was a tactic a strategy we talked about earlier in the year, and we need to get the whole of the NEB infrastructure behind that and putting it in as one of their action steps here, do this simplified, complaint procedure and support the judicial review. But it's really critical. We have to know how bad it is, folks, in order to mobilize
Yeah,
on the, thousands of solutions we know already exist in all of our communities if we're given the space, time, energy, and funding to get on with it. And we really need to mobilize on that level, which is what the NEB is calling for. So a few people there with questions. Thank you so much, John. Always really informative and point of the spear of the campaign. Over to Helen, then Ralph, then David, and anyone else. Pop your hand up. Use the little heart shape down the bottom. We'll go till 10 past. Helen, over.
Yeah, on this either digital rebellion or um, sort of a mass campaign, looking at the audience here, we aren't particularly the digital age group. And I think there's quite often stuff comes through and it's like, I'm in abstracts and it comes through, oh, we're doing this digital rebellion at such and such time, you need to do this. And that. It's like, oh God, I don't really know how to do it. You need to have a Zoom meeting where everyone's in together to encourage each other to do it at the same time.
good idea.
Yeah,
Good
we,
idea.
we've done that for things like the city plan. Actually, go through it together,
That's
just to
brilliant.
incentivize people to do it. You need something like that to get it going. And I just wonder on the news side, can we push news round to get it out to the kids? Because that
John Craven.
that is why our council declared a climate emergency. It was because of the school strikes, because the
Wow.
children wanted it. The
Mm.
fact it was people in Extinction Rebellion who wrote it for the school kids. But yeah, so you use children that way. They won't
Um,
Yeah.
mind.
just a key point there. That's really good, Helen. Filling out one of these Ofcom complaints, doing a big bit of paperwork sometimes is a head thing. If you did it a group, how long would it take if you did it together with people in a Zoom? Half an hour to fill out the form? Question to
Oh,
John
I've
and
not
then to
actually
Ralph.
done it. I mean, I've done the Ofcom form for a full-blown complaint that's already gone through the BBC's processes. I've not actually tried playing with it to do the direct complaint.
Right,
So
let's
I need to
gamify it.
do that. Yeah, I'll do it. I'll work through until, I'm pretty sure that's the end of the process without actually clicking send. So,
Okay.
yeah, but I think that there's a way that we can really try and streamline this Ofcom will say, oh, it doesn't fit our criteria. But if they had thousands of these things going in, it really gives them a strong feeling that the public are terrified and they want action taken and they're failing in their job.
All right, cool. Let's try and work that one out. Do it together is always easier with big
Yeah,
paperwork.
yeah.
Ralph, over to the tree planting team of Enfield. Over.
Hi,
Over.
John. Fascinating presentation, John. I'm old and maybe I'm naive. Been making a couple of notes while you were talking. I'm probably like you. I've got a stack of books behind me. Um, uh, I'm unable to see the reason behind the BBC lack of coverage. Don't answer that straight away. I've got a sort of rider to that. I think there's always, I look behind the reasons. Is it political? Is it financial? Is there a vested interest? Social media, likewise, cover some of the issues very, very well, but you also see total rubbish and the total opposite, which you're obviously very aware of.
Yeah.
I take a positive action, as Phoenix knows, with our group, Friends of Enfield Chase. We planted 150,000 trees over 6 to 8 years. We feel that is a positive way of counteracting the BBC's lack of coverage. I'm totally in agreement with you on other matters of the BBC's lack of fair coverage, not to do with what you're talking about, so I won't bring that up. But the final thing, and I know Phoenix wants to keep this very brief, some schools are actually encouraged now, as a matter of their curriculum, to teach youngsters about climate change. Without they'll have the scientific knowledge, all the background. Is that not something that will be better than going hammer and tong at the BBC, actually making sure our youngsters, and I'm over 80, and it's the youngsters that we've got to encourage to have a sensible, knowledgeable approach to what you're talking about, John. And hands up to you, hats off to you. Great what you're doing, but I'd like to know, what is the BBC's ulterior motive? End of my rant.
Yeah. I was talking earlier on about, the BBC Top Gear back in the 1990s. They were just chasing ratings. They knew the program was very popular and they wanted people to tune into BBC programs. That's what they wanted. Now, it may be that there are some people in the BBC who will say a lot of people in the general public are averse to frightening news and they won't tune in. It may be that BBC think that there's perhaps a chance that they will actually lose some viewers. But I over the years, and because of the meetings I've had with individual members of BBC staff, I'm firmly of the view that this is political bias. This is going to be a generalisation. It's not always true. But the generalisation is that if your politics are very right wing, you tend to be a bit more selfish. You tend to think, well, I love my luxuries, I love my flights, I like my car drives, I like to eat red meat, and I don't want anybody telling me that I can't do that. So what they'll do is they'll say that we want to tell the public the truth, that climate change is real and it's dangerous and it's happening. We want to alert people to threats of exhaustion or collapse from heat waves. We want to do our public service duty there, but we don't really want people to really start pushing damn hard for immediate steps to decarbonise. We don't want people pressing for emergency action to ditch fossil fuels because we don't want to make the sacrifices. And that's what I think is at the core of the problem with very senior people at the BBC. And there are some appointments there that have been made by David Cameron and by other Conservative prime ministers. You think about, Tim Davies, obviously gone now, but he used to be a member of the Conservative Party. He used to be a Conservative councillor. And we had people who were running the BBC who had made very substantial donations to the Conservative Party. We have Robbie Gibb, who's particularly on the right wing of politics. I don't know whether he's Reform UK, but he's very influential now in the BBC. So there've been these political appointments made, and the people that are there now, they have got immense control over the UK, the direction our country takes, because they've got control of the main public service broadcaster, the BBC, and they ain't going to let that go. They're going to fight us all the way. So that's why I say our only chance is judicial review. So, and also take your point about doing anything we possibly can to educate young people. I completely agree with that, but we have to, the only way we're going to change the BBC, and it's a crucial organisation, is by going for judicial review. Otherwise, they ain't going to budge.
Yeah, it really needs to change, particularly the people in power in the background that, yeah, seem to still have a lot of that reins of power. Over to David Newman, then Dinah in sunny Lewis, which is having a festival of democracy at the weekend. I'm hoping to make it too. Over to David. Dinah might tell us a little bit about that. David, Dinah.
Yeah. Judicial reviews are all about processes and abuses of processes, and not about the decision made, possibly not even about bias. So how does it work in this case?
So the Communications Act 2003 imposes obligations upon the BBC to educate and inform the public and allow them to engage with the world around them, which is a fairly general sort of expression. And that kind of content is written into the BBC Charter. So what we're arguing is that the BBC is failing to adhere to its own charter, and it's failing to adhere to the Communications Act 2003. There's an added point, and that is that this failure by the BBC is a risk to life. So I can only take the advice of the solicitors, the barrister, David Wolf KC, and say that our case is strong, it's robust. The only weakness we have is we've got to wait for that damn BBC review, which is causing me so much pain.
And that is actually one of the procedural things. You have to wait till that's exhausted.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But there may come a point where the solicitors will say, look, the BBC has been promising to do this for a year. They've not done it for a year, so we'll go for judicial review. That may be the outcome. But it is incredibly frustrating that at a time when there are people really keen to get involved in this and have a judicial review started, they're really keen on this idea. They want to help, with fundraising and all the rest of it. And we're not going anywhere. We're not doing anything. We're just sitting, waiting on the BBC. I mean, Leigh are sending letters chivying up the BBC, telling them to get on with it. But so frustrating.
Leigh are brilliant. They help us win the Free and Barnet Library campaign when the government was closing down 450 odd libraries with austerity. Over to Dinah in sunny Lewis. Go for your question or comment and maybe briefly tell us about the festival at the weekend.
Maybe that said, could we, it's good to do it like in surgeries where everybody gets together and does the thing together. We possibly have Phoenix one of these Wednesday evenings with all the climate groups to do it all together. So, it would probably only be like one person from each climate group, but then we could pass it on what we did. We could all learn how to do it together, and then we could share it with our, movement people. And a lot of them have Greenpeace members, and then they'd all share it with their networks and stuff as well. So, just from one evening, we could probably get a bit of traction. The other thing, I know that I'm naive. I always think that there's this Court of Human Rights and what's it for? And I would say that there's a huge risk to life, and the BBC are doing a dereliction of duty in not preparing us for it. And it's our human rights to live. Is there no way that one of these big people like Client Earth, or, what is The Hague for? If it's not a human right to be able to live, and the BBC aren't telling us that we're all going to die, I mean, surely there's some point there, but what do I know? There you go. Thanks.
I mean, you ask the same questions I think a lot of people ask, and that is, how can this possibly be allowed to happen? Isn't there some legal way to stop this? And, our movement has great legal minds working on it. At the moment, our best bet, we feel, with the BBC and the media in general, is to go for a judicial review. Because I have informed other broadcasters like ITV. I've been in correspondence with their senior editors. And I make the point that if we get to judicial review and we win, then that will obviously have an impact upon you, ITV, Channel 4 and Channel 5. You will also have to respond.
Mm. Great stuff. Over to John Bagina. You have to unmute John Bagina, and we might have time for one more question,
Okay.
folks. Run over a little bit.
I'm back on. I was going to give the background of why the BBC is so rabidly right-wing, i.e. anti-climate change.
Yeah.
However, I see somebody else asked the question, and John has already answered that fully, so I won't go over that. However, I will pass on one little whiz, which I do. When you are on your social media on a social media which believes there's climate change, always I am starting to put in sack the BBC board, because that is what is stopping fair and proper exposure of the dangers of climate change. Now, this can't be done unless Lisa Nandy, our media minister, finds a way. But there is no harm in ploughing the ground ahead of this. So what I would recommend to everyone is, when they're talking on social media or to friends or whatever, stick in sack the entire BBC board. That will at least that'll at least take them up and start taking things seriously.
That'll shake them up, John.
Yeah, I mean, you're being completely reasonable. I mean, the scale of this failure is catastrophic. You think about terrible things that have happened, Hillsborough, you think about Grenfell Tower, and, instances where huge numbers have been killed by negligence. Well, just think that here in the UK, we could have a situation in not too many decades from now. There'll be maybe people on this call who could live to see this, where the AMOC has collapsed or virtually collapsed. There's mass death here in the UK. The scale of the failure by the BBC is astronomical. It's unprecedented.
Forgive me, I'm going to put in one more point, if you'll allow me, Chair, please.
Yes, yeah, you go.
I believe I'm a big nerd. Oh God, I'm such a nerd. I love watching BBC parliamentary debates. And I have picked up, without a shadow of a doubt, that the ministers are sitting there frustrated out of their brains because they cannot do progressive policies because of the newspapers, the BBC, the media, all opposing them. So what we do is critical to give them the ammunition. So, I mean, judicial review, I am all for it. Usually banging on about changing the board, BBC board, I'm all for it. I have no doubt Lisa Nandy, whoever the new prime minister is going to be, everyone is in our direction. They just need ammunition. So let's keep providing ammunition.
Yeah, good point.
Thank you.
Very good.
Enough.
All right, I think last question there probably will go to Robert, but I just want to read out what Fiona's put in there, very relevant point into the chat. The first duty of a government is to keep its citizens safe and the country secure. We know that this is not the priority of most governments, let alone the BBC. Our governance structures are not democratic. They're more focused on the dangers from wars than they are from the, climate storms will cause bigger destruction than any man-made war when these storms and floods and tornadoes all start to hit, unless we're better prepared and have a mass mobilization on a solutions campaign. Over to Robert Parry for the last question, and we'll
thanks.
Final comments after that, and
thanks,
what we can all do. Robert, over.
Yeah, thanks. And apologies, my camera doesn't seem to want to work. But there we are. Yeah, John, I don't know whether this is like a naive question, but I think for me, it helps to think how to address this. Is, in your experience with the BBC, to what extent is this failure intentional, and to what extent is it, I think the term is cognitive dissonance, which countless people across the country, the largest percentage of people, I would say, just cannot face into this. And I'm just wondering, to what extent that's what's going on with particularly a sort of behemoth like the BBC, or are there people who know exactly what's going on and they're saying we're just not going to do this?
Yeah, I'm in the conspiracy camp rather than the cock camp on cognitive dissonance. I think that the BBC has done this deliberately. I think about Andrew Marr when he left the BBC. He made a comment about the fact that he was pleased to be going because at long last I'll be allowed to talk about climate change.
Right.
When I met David Shukman, who was senior science correspondent for the BBC for many, many years, I met him outside the BBC during one of the Extinction Rebellion protests, and I chatted to him, and he said, I don't really want to be seen talking to you because I'll only get into trouble.
Wow.
And, you know, and I just thought that we did have a little bit of a conversation, but he was concerned. So I feel that the BBC has been captured by political interests that are determined, resolutely determined, to ensure a certain narrative is relayed to the public, and that the public are not told the most alarming facts, because if they knew them, they would demand far more urgent action to decarbonise, and also the country to prepare. So, I think it is, malevolent. I think it's malevolent behaviour. I think that the BBC is run by people who are incredibly callous and cruel because they were willing to throw the young over a cliff.
Yeah. And do you get, sorry to ask another question, but I mean, have you got a sense of what the motivation is behind that? Because that's always the key thing, isn't it? It's like, why do people want to do that?
It is pure, the thing is, if you talk to people like Nigel Farage or Richard Tice, there's no scientific basis for their opinions on net zero and climate change. There's no scientific basis. And what really motivates them is that they don't want their lifestyles to be changed.
Yeah.
And that is... you will find people in Lib Dems and Labour who agree with that, who feel the same way. It tends to be more towards the right wing of politics. And therefore, that is what we're up against. We're up against an extreme form of selfishness.
Yeah.
I think in the background we have, fossil fuel interests who are controlling the strings of the media, really, when you look at it. And they have been on an active campaign, just like the tobacco companies were on a campaign for 30 years to deny it was bad. Active campaign. They've known since the 70s in their reports that it's melting the ice and placing their oil rigs accordingly. Last one to Dinah, and you might want to give us a quick shout about the Festival of Democracy, and then we'll come back to Jon for parting comments and how we can galvanise the point of the spear of the campaign to get behind helping Jon and the media revolution change the world. Dinah, quick one, and tell us about the festival weekend.
I will. Somebody said it's not that these people actually are motivated to kill all these people and globally warm and destroy all life on Earth. They just don't care if they do. That's the thing. Their motivation is, like you said, just to keep everything like it is. And if there's casualties, well, it's very sad but tough. It's not their business. Although it is their business. We can't do a government petition about the BBC, can we? Because the
government may well say, they will argue, look, we have given the BBC editorial independence, so we can't tell the BBC what it should do. But I do think that there could be a petition to the government to say, look, there is a BBC charter renewal process. There will soon be, in a year or so, a new charter drawn up. And we could actually do a petition saying that charter must include, and we make several bullet points about the climate and ecological emergency, and those must be obligations written into the charter, so that the BBC is absolutely clear about what it must do in future.
It needs clarifying, because I think one of the petitions or things that went into government, I did see a reply on one of the chats, so much information, but one said that the government came back and said, it's not up to us to tell the BBC what to do. It's the BBC on its chart. So they kind of passed it back to the BBC. But then there's this thing of like, in matters of national emergency, you, the government, and them are responsible under the Communications Act to tell us about critically, life-threatening things, which whether that's a war happening or, climate change that's going to affect so much. So they did kind of try and pass the buck, didn't they, once? And then let's come to...
Yeah, they did. But, COVID emergency showed that the BBC was under instruction from the BBC. Look, you have got to broadcast this.
By the government. The government instructed the BBC, you have to do COVID stuff.
Yeah.
So by thing, the government should be able to say, you need to do a national broadcast on that.
And,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
what I meant was with the government petition is that it says in it, we demand that the BBC reports fairly on the terrible risk of, billions dying, all the stuff you said. And that is the petition that is signed, because when it gets to a certain number, they have to discuss it, don't they? And we could also do that through this network as well. It's just that I know that they don't even listen to some petitions unless they're on Gov petition paper.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You could say, that what you said. And just to fill in, we've got a Festival of Democracy in Lewes on Saturday, focusing on Thomas Paine, the rights of man, and trying to focus on the fact that our democracy is really, really under threat and nobody is taking responsibility or accountability. And what that chap said before about telling the young, yes, but it actually is our responsibility to sort out as much as we can before we go.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I completely agree with that.
All right. Helen, I see your hand up. Do you want to do a very brief one? Because I want to get John to sum up.
Just very briefly, we had Alex Sobel, who's a very green Labour MP, say that they don't want to come across as fascist by telling the BBC or the media companies what to do. In other words, they're running scared of them, just like they're running scared of reform.
Yeah.
They're not being leaders, they're being sheep.
Yeah,
I agree.
So Fiona's just mentioned the NEB is doing a similar petition on coverage, mustn't divide interest. So let's just double check. There's that there. But so John, thank you so much for coming tonight. Really, really informative always. If there's anything we can put out on the CC email list out about this and the WhatsApp and other things, and really hone together how can we talked earlier in the year about a massive Ofcom complaint similar to the big one. All these big groups put it out to all of their networks and say this is a simplified way to do it. And I love the idea of a kind of watch party Zoom thing where we fill the forms out together. But over to you really for summary. Thank you so much for coming, and anything else you want to share at the end, or what we can do, or any other next steps. Thank you. You're an absolute legend. Point of the spear.
Oh, you're really kind. I'm really grateful
with you.
You're very kind. So out of the National Emergency Briefing group, there's a WhatsApp group, quite a lot of people in it. I did say, look, we'll have a separate group set up to pursue this BBC Judicial Review project. And there are several strands of work that are going along in connection with that. So what I'd say to people is that if you can help with it, there are all kinds of jobs that we're doing, too many jobs for me to be able to recount here on this call. All kinds of things happening. But, if you can help, then it would be good if you were to join that WhatsApp group. Not everybody uses WhatsApp, but it is a convenient and easy way for a lot of people to communicate and take actions. So I'm just thinking, Phoenix, how we can best pass that off. I will not really give people my phone number when I'm actually on a Zoom call that will be put up on YouTube. Maybe I should not put my telephone number on YouTube. But if there's some way that we can communicate that to people so that you can join the WhatsApp group.
That particular WhatsApp group, isn't there an invite code that we can share now in the chat, and can also go out in the email to 2,000 odd people that we send out each week?
Yeah, I don't know whether you've got somebody clever on the call who can quickly look it up and see if they can get that invite. If not,
give me the name of the group. Give me the name. I'm not that clever, but give me the name of the group. I get a WhatsApp. It's BBC something, isn't it? BBC JR Project. Is that what it's called? So if I go up the top, we should be able to maybe find. Oh, where's it gone? There should be an invite code somewhere.
Gosh, but my problem is I'm speaking into my phone. I'm using my phone's camera for this call, and if I attempt to do something else on that phone, I'll cut you all off.
Give me one second. I'll try it on my phone. If I can stick it into the computer thing, we'll do that. But also, we should send it out to people.
I think Phil Scone has put a link in the chat.
Top man, Phil Scone. Love it. University Challenge Hartford, 10 points.
Thank you.
All right,
Yes.
ladies and gentlemen. So there is the link. This is the BBC. Save that one. If you want to save this chat, three dots up the top right, and you can save it. It will be on the CC main chat. John, thank you so much for all your work.
Brilliant.
And let's get back with a targeted campaign to the NEB and main CC momentum stuff and get this out further. Thank you so much for coming.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Phoenix. I'm very grateful to you. And thank you to everybody that came along tonight.
And big up Linda for her relentless work on the CEC webinars and
Yeah.
keeping at it to get John in this week. All right, I'm going to stop the recording there.